There is a particular exhaustion that empaths carry, and it is not the kind that sleep can repair. It is the fatigue of a nervous system that has been on alert for years, scanning faces, tones, silences, and subtle shifts in mood. It is the quiet burden of being the emotional caretaker in rooms where no one asked how you were doing. When we speak of empaths, we often romanticize their sensitivity. We call it a gift, but we rarely ask what conditions shape that sensitivity in the first place. An empath is not born from softness alone. More often, they are shaped in environments where attunement was necessary for survival. They learned early that love could disappear, that safety could shift without warning, that harmony had to be maintained at all costs. So they became experts at reading others. They became peacekeepers. They became light in dark rooms. But here is the warning: when you have been conditioned to provide emotional safety for others, there will always be those who unconsciously, and sometimes consciously, feed on that light. They gravitate toward your steadiness because they lack their own. They are drawn to your compassion because it soothes wounds they refuse to face. And slowly, without you realizing it, your empathy becomes the currency in relationships that do not nourish you. This sermon is not about blaming others. It is about awareness. It is about recognizing that your light was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to illuminate your own path as well. And when empathy turns into self-erasure, when compassion becomes self-abandonment, when understanding others costs you your own truth, that is not love. That is trauma repeating itself in adult form. The final warning is not a threat. It is an invitation to understand your patterns, to see how your nervous system was trained to equate overgiving with belonging, to recognize that the very quality that makes you extraordinary can also be the doorway through which you are depleted. Because the question is not why they feed on your light. The deeper question is why you were taught to offer it without limits. In truth, there is a particular exhaustion that empaths carry, and it is not the kind that sleep can repair. It is the fatigue of a nervous system that has been on alert for years, scanning faces, tones, silences, and subtle shifts in mood. It is the quiet burden of being the emotional caretaker in rooms where no one asked how you were doing. When we speak of empaths, we often romanticize their sensitivity. We call it a gift, but we rarely ask what conditions shape that sensitivity in the first place. An empath is not born from softness alone. More often, they are shaped in environments where attunement was necessary for survival. They learned early that love could disappear, that safety could shift without warning, that harmony had to be maintained at all costs. So they became experts at reading others. They became peacekeepers. They became light in dark rooms. But here is the warning: when you have been conditioned to provide emotional safety for others, there will always be those who unconsciously, and sometimes consciously, feed on that light. They gravitate toward your steadiness because they lack their own. They are drawn to your compassion because it soothes wounds they refuse to face. And slowly, without you realizing it, your empathy becomes the currency in relationships that do not nourish you. This sermon is not about blaming others. It is about awareness. It is about recognizing that your light was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to illuminate your own path as well. And when empathy turns into self-erasure, when compassion becomes self-abandonment, when understanding others costs you your own truth, that is not love. That is trauma repeating itself in adult form. The final warning is not a threat. It is an invitation to understand your patterns, to see how your nervous system was trained to equate overgiving with belonging, to recognize that the very quality that makes you extraordinary can also be the doorway through which you are depleted. Because the question is not why they feed on your light. The deeper question is why you were taught to offer it without limits. Definite keynotes 1. Empathy born from survival, not superiority 2. The addiction to being needed 3. When compassion becomes self-abandonment 4. Trauma bonds disguised as soul connections 5. The narcissistic empath dance 6. Boundaries as a nervous system reset 7. Grieving the identity of the strong one 8. Reclaiming your light without guilt 2. Empathy born from survival is not a personality trait, it is an adaptation. Many empaths grew up in environments where emotional unpredictability was the norm. A parent's mood could shift like weather. Approval was conditional. Affection came with invisible strings. In such settings, the child's nervous system learned that safety depended on vigilance. You learned to read micro-expressions before you learned to read books. You learned the tone of disappointment before you understood your own desires. This is not weakness. It is brilliance under pressure. But brilliance developed in chaos often carries a cost. When a child becomes hyper-attuned to others, it is usually because their own emotional world was not adequately mirrored. There was no consistent presence saying, "What do you feel? What do you need?" Instead, there was an unspoken question in the air: "How can you make this easier for us?" And so you did. You adjusted. You softened. You absorbed tension before it escalated. You became the emotional regulator for the adults in the room. Over time, this adaptation hardens into identity. You are praised for being mature. You are admired for being understanding. You are labeled the strong one, the calm one, the wise one. But beneath that praise is a nervous system that has never truly exhaled. Because your empathy was not cultivated in safety. It was carved out of necessity. When you enter adulthood, this pattern does not simply disappear. The nervous system seeks what is familiar, not what is healthy. You may find yourself drawn to people who are emotionally volatile, wounded, distant, or broken in ways that feel strangely recognizable. Your body knows this dance. It knows how to anticipate their needs, how to soothe their storms, how to dim your own discomfort in order to maintain connection. And this is where the feeding begins. Not always maliciously, not always intentionally, but predictably. People who have not learned to self-regulate will instinctively lean on those who can. And you can. You can hold space. You can understand their childhood. You can excuse their behavior. You can translate their silence. You can see the pain behind their anger. But seeing the wound does not obligate you to bleed for it. The tragedy is that many empaths confuse understanding with responsibility. Because as children, understanding was tied to survival. If you could just understand why they were upset, maybe you could fix it. If you could just anticipate the explosion, maybe you could prevent it. That wiring remains. So when someone in your adult life struggles, your body does not simply feel compassion. It feels activation. It feels duty. And slowly, subtly, your needs move to the background. You tolerate inconsistency because you can empathize with their trauma. You excuse neglect because you know they are stressed. You overextend because you remember what it felt like to not be understood. And each time you override your own discomfort, you reinforce the old survival script. Connection requires self-abandonment. The final warning is this: the very trait that once protected you can now imprison you. When empathy is rooted in fear of disconnection, it becomes compulsive. You do not help because you choose to. You help because you cannot bear the anxiety of not helping. You give because your body equates giving with safety. But real empathy, healthy empathy, does not require self-sacrifice. It does not demand that you absorb another person's chaos. It allows for compassion with boundaries. It recognizes that you can care deeply without collapsing into someone else's emotional field. To break this pattern, you must first acknowledge its origin. Not to blame your past, but to understand your present. Your hyperattunement was intelligent. It was necessary. It kept you connected in environments where disconnection felt dangerous. But you are no longer that child. The room has changed, even if your nervous system has not realized it yet. The work now is not to become less empathetic. It is to redirect that empathy inward. To notice when your body tightens in the presence of someone who constantly needs rescuing. To question the urge to fix before you have felt your own feelings. To sit with the discomfort of allowing others to manage their own emotional lives. This can feel selfish at first. It can feel wrong. Because your identity has been built around being the one who understands, the one who gives, the one who stays. Letting go of that role can feel like losing yourself. But perhaps what you are losing is not your true self, but the version of you that was shaped by survival. Empathy born from survival deserves to evolve. It deserves to be held by strength rather than fear. It deserves to exist alongside boundaries rather than in place of them. And until you see that your light was forged in adaptation, you will continue offering it as proof of your worth, rather than as an expression of your wholeness. The addiction to being needed rarely feels like an addiction. It feels like purpose. It feels like love. It feels like identity. When you are the one people call in crisis, when you are the steady voice in chaos, when others lean on you for clarity and comfort, it gives you a sense of value that can be profoundly intoxicating. But we must ask gently and honestly what happens inside you when no one needs you. For many empaths, being needed is not simply a role, it is regulation. As children, you may have discovered that your worth was most visible when you were helpful. Perhaps affection increased when you were compliant. Perhaps tension decreased when you were accommodating. The nervous system quickly learns this equation: usefulness equals safety. So you become useful. Exceptionally useful. Over time, this usefulness becomes intertwined with love. You do not just want connection, you want to earn it. You do not just want partnership, you want indispensability. There is a subtle but powerful difference. Healthy love allows two whole people to stand side by side. Trauma, bonded attachment often requires one person to be the stabilizer and the other to be stabilized. The addiction to being needed reveals itself in the kinds of relationships you gravitate toward. You may feel restless or bored with someone who is emotionally self-sufficient. Stability can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But someone who is wounded, overwhelmed, or searching for direction can awaken something intense in you. Your body feels activated. Your empathy sharpens. Your mind begins mapping solutions before they have even asked for help. This activation is not random. It is your old wiring lighting up. When someone depends on you, you feel anchored. When someone praises you for your understanding, you feel seen. When someone says, "I don't know what I'd do without you," it can land like oxygen. But beneath that validation is often a quieter fear. Who am I if I am not needed? That question can be terrifying, because if your identity was built around caretaking, then mutuality can feel like erasure. If you are not solving, soothing, guiding, or rescuing, what is your function? Many empaths unconsciously choose partners or friends who cannot fully stand on their own, not because they enjoy imbalance, but because balance feels like loss of significance. The addiction deepens when being needed shields you from your own unmet needs. As long as you are focused on someone else's crisis, you do not have to face your loneliness. As long as you are supporting another person's growth, you do not have to confront your own stalled dreams. As long as you are indispensable, you do not have to ask whether anyone truly sees you beyond what you provide. This is not manipulation, it is protection. But protection can become a prison. When your nervous system equates being needed with being loved, you may tolerate dynamics that quietly drain you. You may accept emotional inconsistency because they need time. You may overlook disrespect because they are struggling. You may overextend financially, emotionally, spiritually, because pulling back triggers anxiety. The anxiety is not about them alone. It is about the possibility of becoming irrelevant. And irrelevance, for someone whose early safety depended on usefulness, can feel like abandonment, so you overgive, you overfunction, you anticipate needs before they are spoken, you step in before they stumble. And ironically, the more you do for others, the less space there is for them to grow. Your rescue becomes their crutch. Your strength becomes their avoidance. Without intending to, you participate in a dynamic where your light fuels their stagnation. The final warning here is subtle but urgent. When being needed becomes your primary source of self-worth, you will unconsciously seek out those who cannot thrive without you. And in doing so, you will repeatedly sacrifice the possibility of reciprocal love. Reciprocal love can feel unfamiliar because it does not require performance. It does not depend on crisis. It does not revolve around fixing. It asks you to show up not as the healer, but as the human. And that can feel more vulnerable than any rescue mission. To loosen the grip of this addiction, you must begin by tolerating the discomfort of not stepping in. When someone you care about struggles, notice the impulse to immediately solve. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself whether your help is being requested or whether your nervous system is trying to secure connection. This pause can feel excruciating at first. Your body may interpret it as danger, but over time it becomes freedom. You must also gently question the belief that your worth is tied to your utility. Who are you when you are resting? Who are you when you are not advising, guiding, supporting? Can you sit in a room and simply exist without scanning for how to be of service? This is not about becoming indifferent. It is about becoming integrated. True compassion does not require you to abandon yourself. True connection does not require you to be indispensable. In fact, the healthiest relationships are built between two people who could survive without each other but choose not to. The addiction to being needed is not a flaw in your character. It is a strategy your nervous system developed to ensure belonging. But strategies that once protected you can outlive their usefulness. And if you do not examine this pattern, you will continue attracting those who rely on your light, while never learning to generate their own, continuing to confuse exhaustion with devotion, continuing to mistake indispensability for intimacy. When compassion becomes self-abandonment, it rarely announces itself as harm. It disguises itself as patience, as understanding, as maturity. You tell yourself you are simply being empathetic. You remind yourself that everyone has wounds. You pride yourself on being the one who can see the pain beneath the behavior. And yet quietly, something inside you keeps getting pushed aside. For many empaths, compassion was once a bridge to connection. As children, you may have sensed that expressing your own anger, sadness, or confusion only made things worse. Perhaps your emotions were dismissed. Perhaps they were met with irritation, silence, or withdrawal. So you learned to pivot away from yourself and toward others. You learned that tuning into their needs reduced conflict, that softening your edges preserved closeness, that understanding them was safer than asking to be understood. Over time, this becomes automatic. In conflict, you instinctively search for their perspective before acknowledging your own hurt. When someone disappoints you, you immediately construct the narrative that explains their stress, their trauma, their exhaustion. Your empathy activates so quickly that your own pain barely registers. And if it does, it is often accompanied by guilt. Guilt for feeling too sensitive, guilt for expecting too much, guilt for wanting reciprocity. This is where compassion crosses the line into self-abandonment. Self-abandonment is not dramatic. It is subtle. It is the moment you say, "It's okay," when it isn't. It is the smile you force while your chest tightens. It is agreeing to things that exhaust you because saying no feels like betrayal. It is convincing yourself that your needs can wait indefinitely. Your nervous system may equate self-silencing with safety. After all, earlier in life, minimizing yourself may have preserved attachment. But as an adult, this same pattern erodes your sense of self. Every time you override your intuition to maintain harmony, you send your body a message: my feelings are secondary. Every time you excuse behavior that hurts you, you reinforce the belief that connection requires sacrifice. What makes this especially painful for empaths is that your compassion is genuine. You truly do understand. You truly do see the wounds in others. But understanding someone's trauma does not obligate you to tolerate its impact on you. This distinction can feel almost radical, because you have been taught, implicitly or explicitly, that love means enduring. So you endure mood swings, you endure inconsistency, you endure emotional unavailability, you endure being the only one doing the emotional labor. And you call it loyalty, but loyalty without mutual care becomes depletion. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. There is a quiet grief that accompanies this realization, because you may begin to see that many of your relationships were built not on mutual presence, but on your capacity to absorb. When compassion becomes self-abandonment, your body often speaks before your mind does. You feel chronic fatigue. You feel tension in your shoulders, tightness in your jaw, heaviness in your chest. You may struggle with resentment that you immediately judge and suppress. That resentment is not cruelty. It is information. It is the part of you that knows you are giving more than you are receiving. Yet expressing that imbalance can feel terrifying. If your identity is rooted in being the understanding one, what happens when you say, "This hurts me"? If you are the strong one, what happens when you admit you are tired? There can be a deep fear that asserting your needs will cost you love, and so you choose silence, again and again. But each silence distances you from yourself. The final warning here is not about becoming hardened or withholding. It is about recognizing that compassion must include you. When you extend infinite understanding to others but none to yourself, you recreate the very neglect that shaped you. You become both the giver and the one who goes unseen. Healthy compassion requires boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. They are the ability to say, "I understand you are struggling, and I cannot accept being spoken to this way." They are the capacity to care without collapsing. They are the willingness to let others experience the consequences of their behavior rather than cushioning every fall. This shift can feel profoundly uncomfortable. Your nervous system may interpret it as danger. You may fear being labeled selfish, cold, or uncaring. But in reality, you are learning to integrate empathy with self-respect. You are allowing your compassion to mature. Mature compassion does not rush to fix. It does not over-explain your pain to make it palatable. It does not negotiate away your boundaries to maintain peace. It recognizes that you can hold space for someone's humanity while still honoring your own. When you stop abandoning yourself, some relationships will shift. Some may fall away because they were sustained by your silence. This loss can feel destabilizing, but what remains will be built on truth rather than endurance. Compassion was never meant to cost you your voice. It was never meant to require your disappearance. If your light is constantly dimming in the name of understanding others, it is not because you are too sensitive. It is because you have been generous without limits. And generosity without self-regard inevitably turns into quiet self-betrayal, into a pattern where your empathy becomes the very mechanism through which you are diminished. Trauma bonds disguised as soul connections are among the most intoxicating experiences an empath can have. They do not begin with obvious dysfunction. They begin with intensity, with recognition, with the uncanny feeling that someone finally sees you in a way no one else ever has. It can feel spiritual, fated, as though the universe conspired to bring two wounded hearts together for healing. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. For many empaths, especially those shaped by early emotional unpredictability, familiarity often masquerades as chemistry. When someone enters your life carrying unresolved pain, emotional volatility, or deep longing, your nervous system may light up in recognition, not because it is healthy, but because it is known. If love in your early years was inconsistent, warm one moment, distant the next, your body learned to equate uncertainty with attachment. The push and pull became normal. The sudden withdrawal followed by passionate reconnection became proof that something mattered. Stability, by contrast, may feel dull or even suspicious. So when you meet someone who mirrors the emotional highs and lows of your childhood, it can feel electric. Conversations dive deep quickly. Vulnerabilities are shared early. There is talk of destiny, of finally being understood, of never having felt this way before. And you, with your attuned heart, respond with openness. You see their wounds and feel honored that they trust you with them. This is the beginning of the bond. Trauma bonds are built on intermittent reinforcement. Periods of closeness are followed by withdrawal. Affection is intense, then withheld. Promises are made in moments of connection and forgotten in moments of distance. Your nervous system becomes hooked not on consistent love, but on the relief that comes after anxiety. When they return after pulling away, the reunion feels euphoric. The contrast magnifies the emotion. You tell yourself this depth means something profound. You interpret the pain as evidence of passion. You believe the struggle is proof of a rare connection. But what is often happening beneath the surface is a reenactment. Your body is chasing resolution to an old wound through a new person. Because trauma bonds activate your early survival wiring. When they withdraw, you feel a familiar panic. When they criticize, you instinctively search for what you did wrong. When they struggle, you step into caretaker mode. You work harder to understand, to soothe, to prove your loyalty. Each cycle strengthens the attachment, not because it is nourishing, but because it is unresolved. The language of soul connection can make this even more powerful. Words like twin flame, karmic, or meant to be can romanticize instability. They give spiritual meaning to emotional chaos. And for an empath who deeply values meaning, this framing can be compelling. It feels purposeful, transformative, redemptive. But true soul-level connection does not require you to abandon yourself. A genuine, secure bond is not built on anxiety and relief. It is built on steadiness. It does not require you to earn closeness through endurance. It does not punish you with silence. It does not make you question your worth in moments of conflict. Trauma bonds, however, thrive on imbalance. Often one person is more regulated, more introspective, more willing to do the emotional work. The other may oscillate between vulnerability and avoidance. You become the stabilizer, the translator of their feelings, the holder of hope when they retreat. And because you can see their potential, you hold on. Empaths are especially susceptible to this dynamic because you do not fall in love only with who someone is. You fall in love with who they could become. You see their wounded child. You see their brilliance beneath the fear. You see the future version of them that is healed and whole. And you commit yourself to helping them get there. But love cannot substitute for their willingness to grow. The final warning here is that trauma bonds feel profound, precisely, because they are entangled with your earliest attachment patterns. Breaking them can feel like losing a part of yourself. The separation can trigger grief that feels disproportionate to the actual duration of the relationship. That is because you are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the hope of finally resolving an old ache. To untangle a trauma bond, you must gently separate intensity from intimacy. Ask yourself, is this connection consistent? Do I feel safe expressing my needs? Is there reciprocity, or am I carrying the emotional weight? Does the relationship expand my life, or does it consume my energy? Your body often knows before your mind does. Notice whether you feel calm in their presence or constantly alert. Notice whether your joy depends on their mood. Notice whether your sense of worth rises and falls with their approval. A soul connection does not require you to perform. It does not thrive on confusion. It does not feed on your light while offering only glimpses of warmth in return. It honors your boundaries. It meets your vulnerability with stability. It allows both people to grow without one sacrificing themselves for the other. When you begin to see the difference, the illusion can shatter, and that shattering can feel devastating. But within it is clarity, a recognition that what felt cosmic may have been familiar, that what felt destined may have been patterned, and that your capacity for depth was never the problem, only the places you offered it without equal ground, without mutual steadiness, without the safety that real intimacy requires. The narcissistic empath dance is not a random pairing. It is a choreography shaped by complementary wounds. On the surface, it can look like chemistry. One person is expressive, intense, magnetic. The other is attuned, patient, deeply compassionate. There is a spark that feels almost inevitable, as though two missing pieces have found each other. But what is often unfolding is not balance. It is mutual reinforcement of unhealed patterns. The empath enters the dance with a heightened capacity to read emotional undercurrents. You notice subtle shifts in tone, posture, silence. You instinctively adjust to maintain harmony. Your strength lies in your sensitivity. You can hold space. You can validate. You can endure discomfort in the name of understanding. The narcissistic partner, in contrast, often carries a fragile sense of self masked by confidence or control. Beneath the grandiosity or defensiveness is a deep, unacknowledged shame. They may crave admiration, reassurance, or dominance to stabilize an inner emptiness. Where you overfunction emotionally, they may underfunction. Where you question yourself, they may rarely do so outwardly. This creates a powerful polarity. At the beginning, the narcissistic partner may idealize you. They may shower you with attention, praise your uniqueness, express how deeply connected they feel. For an empath who longs to be seen beyond their caretaking role, this can feel intoxicating. Finally, someone who recognizes your depth. Finally, someone who seems captivated by your light. But idealization is part of the cycle. As the relationship progresses, subtle shifts occur. Criticism creeps in, your sensitivity is reframed as weakness. Your needs are labeled as excessive. You begin to work harder to regain the earlier warmth. You analyze conversations. You adjust your tone. You soften your requests. You try to anticipate triggers before they arise. The dance intensifies. The narcissistic partner may withdraw affection when displeased, creating anxiety. They may rewrite events to avoid accountability, leaving you doubting your perception. Because you are naturally introspective, you are prone to asking, "What did I do wrong?" rather than, "Is this behavior acceptable?" Your empathy turns inward as self-blame, and this is where the feeding deepens. Your light, your capacity to understand, forgive, and persist, becomes the very resource that sustains the imbalance. The more they externalize blame, the more you internalize it. The more they demand validation, the more you provide it. The more they resist vulnerability, the more you offer yours. It is important to understand that this dynamic is rarely conscious on either side. The narcissistic partner is often acting from their own unhealed attachment wounds. Control, superiority, or emotional withdrawal are defenses against shame. But understanding the origin of their behavior does not make its impact any less real. For the empath, the cost accumulates slowly. You may begin to feel smaller, quieter, more cautious. You monitor your words to avoid conflict. You downplay your achievements to protect their ego. You silence your hurt because addressing it leads to defensiveness or dismissal. Your world gradually orbits their moods. The tragedy is that your empathy keeps you hopeful. You see glimpses of their vulnerability. You witness moments of softness. You believe that if you love them consistently enough, they will feel safe enough to change. You commit to being the stable presence they never had. But love cannot heal someone who refuses to examine themselves. The narcissistic empath dance continues because it serves both nervous systems in distorted ways. The narcissistic partner receives validation and emotional regulation. The empath receives a sense of purpose and the illusion of deep connection. Both are reenacting early attachment patterns, one seeking control to avoid shame, the other seeking approval to avoid abandonment. Breaking this dance requires immense awareness. You must begin to notice when your empathy shifts into overcompensation, when you are apologizing for things that are not yours, when you are shrinking to maintain peace, when your boundaries are treated as threats rather than respected limits. It also requires grieving the fantasy that your love could be the catalyst for their transformation, the fantasy that if you just explain yourself better, give more, endure longer, the dynamic will stabilize. Letting go of this hope can feel like betrayal of your compassionate nature, but compassion without self-protection becomes self-destruction. Healthy partnership does not rely on one person carrying the emotional weight. It does not punish vulnerability. It does not twist empathy into obligation. In a secure bond, both individuals are capable of reflection, both can apologize, both can tolerate discomfort without resorting to control or collapse. The final warning in this dance is not about labeling others. It is about recognizing patterns. If your light is consistently used to soothe someone who refuses to take responsibility, if your empathy is met with entitlement rather than gratitude, if your boundaries provoke hostility rather than dialogue, then you are not in a partnership of equals. You are in a choreography written long before you met, and unless you step off the floor, unless you interrupt the automatic movements of overgiving, over-explaining, over-accommodating, the music will continue. The steps will repeat. Your light will keep illuminating someone else's shadow while your own edges fade, while your own needs remain peripheral. While the dance goes on exactly as it always has, boundaries are often misunderstood by empaths as rejection, as cruelty, as a form of abandonment. If your early survival depended on maintaining harmony, then any act that risks conflict can feel dangerous. Your nervous system may interpret a simple no as a threat to connection, and so you avoid it, you bend, you negotiate with yourself. You tell yourself it is easier to give than to disrupt. But boundaries are not walls built to keep love out. They are signals to your nervous system that you are safe with yourself. When you have spent years scanning others for cues, monitoring tone, mood, subtle shifts, your body becomes externally oriented. Safety is determined by how others are feeling. If they are calm, you can exhale. If they are upset, you tense. Your internal state is tethered to theirs. This is exhausting. It means you rarely rest in your own center. A boundary interrupts that tether. It says your emotions are yours. Mine are mine. It says I can care about you without absorbing you. It says connection does not require self-erasure. For an empath, this can feel revolutionary, because setting a boundary activates old fears. What if they withdraw? What if they accuse you of being selfish? What if they no longer need you? The anxiety that rises in these moments is not proof that the boundary is wrong. It is evidence that your nervous system is recalibrating. If, as a child, asserting yourself led to disapproval or emotional distance, then silence became your strategy. You learned that minimizing your needs preserved attachment. But as an adult, that same strategy preserves imbalance. Each time you override your discomfort to keep someone else comfortable, your body absorbs the cost. Boundaries are a reset because they teach your nervous system a new equation. I can assert myself and still survive. I can disappoint someone and remain worthy. I can tolerate tension without collapsing. This does not happen instantly. The first time you say no without over-explaining, your heart may race. Your chest may tighten. You may feel an overwhelming urge to soften the statement, to add justifications, to reassure the other person that you still care. Notice that urge. It is the echo of old conditioning. A boundary does not require a defense. It requires clarity. When you begin setting limits, some relationships will resist, particularly those that benefited from your lack of them. If someone is accustomed to your constant availability, your sudden self-protection may feel like betrayal to them. They may push back. They may attempt to guilt you. They may question your change. This reaction is information. Healthy individuals adjust. They may need time, but they respect your autonomy. Those who relied on your overgiving may react with anger or manipulation. Their discomfort does not mean you are wrong. It means the dynamic is shifting. A nervous system reset also involves internal boundaries. It is not only about what you allow from others. It is about what you allow from yourself. Do you permit yourself to rest without earning it? Do you allow your feelings to exist without immediately reframing them to protect someone else? Do you give yourself the same compassion you extend so freely outward? Many empaths have porous internal boundaries. You may criticize yourself for being tired. You may dismiss your intuition as overreaction. You may override your body's signals in order to fulfill obligations. Resetting your nervous system means listening to those signals rather than arguing with them. It means noticing when a conversation leaves you drained and asking why. It means recognizing when you are about to say yes out of fear rather than desire. It means pausing before stepping into rescuer mode. Each pause strengthens your internal anchor. Boundaries also redefine love. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is dependency. Love that punishes you for having limits is not intimacy. It is control. Real connection can withstand your no. It can hold your truth. It does not crumble when you prioritize your well-being. The final warning here is gentle but firm. Without boundaries, your empathy will continue to be harvested. Not because you are weak, but because you are open. Openness without discernment invites depletion. Sensitivity without limits invites intrusion. Resetting your nervous system is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming regulated. It is about shifting from reactive caretaking to conscious choice. When you choose to give rather than feel compelled to give, your empathy becomes sustainable. When you know you can walk away, your staying becomes powerful. Your light was never meant to flicker under the weight of everyone else's expectations. It was meant to shine from a grounded place. Boundaries are what ground you. They teach your body that you are no longer the child who must earn safety through self-sacrifice. They teach you that your needs are not threats to love. They remind you that protecting your energy is not abandonment of others, but an act of loyalty to yourself. A declaration that your presence in any relationship will no longer come at the cost of your own stability, your own voice, your own right to exist without constantly negotiating your worth. Grieving the identity of the strong one is one of the quietest and most disorienting losses an empath can experience. Because strength in your life was never just a compliment. It was a role, a responsibility, a silent contract you signed long before you understood its cost. You were the one who didn't make things harder, the one who handled it, the one who understood, the one who stayed steady when others unraveled. And somewhere along the way, being strong became synonymous with being worthy. As a child, perhaps your tears were inconvenient. Perhaps your fears were minimized. Perhaps you sensed that the adults around you were already overwhelmed. So you tightened your jaw, you swallowed your needs. You matured quickly. People praised you for it. You're so strong. You're so wise for your age. We don't have to worry about you. Those words may have felt like love. But beneath them was an unspoken message. Do not fall apart. So you didn't. You became self-sufficient, hyper-competent, emotionally available to everyone but yourself. And because you carried it well, no one questioned the weight. In fact, the stronger you appeared, the more was placed on you. Family leaned on you. Friends confided in you. Partners depended on you. Your resilience became a resource others consumed without noticing the depletion. Over time, the strong one stopped being something you did and became who you were. But identities formed in survival often come with hidden grief. Because being the strong one meant you rarely got to be held. It meant your vulnerability felt dangerous. It meant when you were hurting, you questioned whether you had the right to show it. After all, you were the stable one, the grounded one, the one who had it together. There is a particular loneliness in that role. When people assume you can handle everything, they stop asking if you're okay. When you consistently offer support, others forget you need it too. And when you finally reach your limit, the collapse can feel shocking, not only to them, but to you. The grief begins when you realize that your strength was, in many ways, armor. Armor that protected you from rejection. Armor that ensured you would not be seen as a burden. Armor that made you indispensable. But armor also prevents true intimacy. If no one sees your cracks, no one can love you there. If you are always the pillar, you never get to lean. And slowly, the role that once empowered you begins to suffocate you. Letting go of the strong one can feel like betrayal of everything you've built. Who are you if you are not the reliable one? If you say, I can't handle this, will people still respect you? If you admit you're overwhelmed, will they see you differently? These fears are real because your nervous system equates vulnerability with risk. In the past, showing weakness may have led to disappointment or dismissal. So you adapted by eliminating visible weakness. You became impenetrable. But impenetrability is not the same as wholeness. Grieving this identity means acknowledging that it protected you and that it also isolated you. It means recognizing that being strong all the time is not strength. It is endurance, and endurance without relief eventually becomes exhaustion. As you begin to loosen your grip on this role, discomfort arises. You may feel exposed, awkward, unsure how to ask for help without immediately retracting the request. You may overexplain your fatigue, as though you need to justify your humanity. You may apologize for having limits. This is the unraveling of a lifelong script. Some people in your life may resist this shift. They benefited from your unwavering stability. They may question your change. They may subtly pressure you to return to the familiar dynamic. Their reaction can trigger guilt. You might think, maybe I should just handle it. Maybe I'm overreacting. But this is the turning point. To release the identity of the strong one is to allow yourself to be multidimensional, to be capable and vulnerable, to be supportive and in need of support, to be resilient and sometimes undone. It is to stop performing invincibility and start inhabiting authenticity. There is grief because you are shedding a version of yourself that earned admiration, You are stepping into uncertainty. You are risking being seen in ways that feel raw. But within that grief is liberation. Because when you are no longer defined by constant strength, you make space for reciprocal relationships. You create room for others to show up for you. You stop equating silence with maturity and start recognizing that sharing your struggle is not weakness, but courage. The final warning here is gentle. If you cling to the identity of the strong one, you will continue to attract those who need your strength, but cannot meet your softness. You will remain the anchor for others while drifting from yourself. You will carry burdens in silence, because it feels safer than asking to be held. But you were never meant to be unbreakable. You were meant to be human. And grieving the strong one is not losing your power. It is reclaiming the parts of you that were hidden behind it, the tenderness you denied, the exhaustion you ignored, the longing to be supported without first proving you deserve it. Reclaiming your light without guilt is perhaps the most delicate and transformative step of all. Because for much of your life, your light has been intertwined with service, with sacrifice, with being the steady presence in someone else's storm. To redirect that light toward yourself can feel unnatural, even wrong. Guilt is often the first emotion that rises when an empath begins to choose themselves. If you grew up believing that love required selflessness, then self-prioritization may register as betrayal. If your nervous system learned that belonging depended on usefulness, then stepping back can trigger fear. You may hear an internal voice whisper, "You're being selfish. You're changing. You're abandoning people." But there is a profound difference between abandonment and self-honoring. Abandonment is turning away from responsibility. Self-honoring is recognizing what is not yours to carry. For years, you may have taken responsibility for other people's moods, reactions, healing, growth. You may have felt compelled to manage their emotions so that connection remained intact. Your light became a stabilizer for others. Reclaiming it means asking a radical question. What would my energy feel like if it were not constantly on loan? Imagine waking up without scanning for who needs you. Imagine engaging in relationships where your presence is chosen, not required. Imagine giving because you want to, not because anxiety drives you. This shift is not about withdrawing love. It is about purifying it. When you give from guilt, your body tightens. When you give from fear, you overextend. But when you give from wholeness, there is spaciousness. There is choice. There is no resentment beneath the generosity. The guilt you feel when reclaiming your light is often an echo of old conditioning. As a child, asserting yourself may have disrupted the emotional equilibrium of your environment. Perhaps your needs were inconvenient. Perhaps your boundaries were challenged. So you learned that shrinking preserved harmony. Now, when you expand, that old alarm sounds. You might notice it when you decline a request and sit with discomfort afterward. You might feel it when you stop over-explaining your decisions. You might experience it when you no longer rush to fix someone's distress. The guilt does not mean you are wrong. It means you are unfamiliar with putting yourself first. Reclaiming your light also requires confronting identity. If you are no longer the constant rescuer, who are you? If you are not defined by how much you endure, what defines you? These questions can feel destabilizing because your sense of self has long been anchored in overachieving. But beneath the role is a person with desires, creativity, boundaries, and needs that have waited patiently. To reclaim your light is to listen to your own signals with the same attentiveness you offer others. It is to notice when you are tired and rest without justification. It is to pursue what excites you without minimizing it to make others comfortable. It is to allow your joy to exist, even if someone else is struggling. This does not make you cold. It makes you integrated. Healthy empathy includes discernment. It recognizes that supporting someone does not mean absorbing them. It understands that each person is responsible for their own healing. You can walk beside someone without carrying them. You can love deeply without losing yourself. Some relationships may shift as you reclaim your energy. Those who are accustomed to your constant availability may feel unsettled. They may accuse you of changing. In truth, you are evolving. You are no longer relating from compulsion but from clarity. There will be moments of doubt. You may question whether you have gone too far. You may feel tempted to return to familiar patterns because they feel safer. But safety built on self-erasure is fragile. True safety comes from alignment, from knowing that your actions reflect your values rather than your fears. Reclaiming your light without guilt means redefining love. Love is not measured by how much you tolerate. It is not proven by how much you sacrifice. It is expressed through mutual respect, shared responsibility, and freedom. Your light was never meant to be extracted. It was meant to radiate from a grounded core. When you stop offering it as proof of your worth, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes presence. It becomes authenticity. It becomes a quiet confidence that does not need to overextend to secure belonging. The final warning transforms here into an invitation. Stop apologizing for your energy. Stop diluting your brightness to keep others comfortable. Stop equating exhaustion with devotion. You are allowed to protect your time, your emotions, your peace. You are allowed to choose relationships that replenish rather than deplete. When you reclaim your light without guilt, you do not become less compassionate. You become more sustainable. You become someone whose empathy flows from strength rather than survival. And in that shift, your relationships change. Your nervous system softens. Your sense of self stabilizes, because your light is no longer something you hand out in exchange for love, but something you embody fully, unapologetically, without shrinking, without overgiving, without the quiet shame that once convinced you that choosing yourself was wrong.